So we'll be starting off by talking a little bit about the organizations hosting this environmental research seminar. So it's hosted by Clearwater Innovation, which is a nonprofit based in San Diego that encourages garage lab research for high school students who will be exploring some of their projects today. We like to raise awareness about the global water crisis and increase student environmental public policy engagement. And we're also in collaboration with Project Arise. And Sophie, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. So Project Arise, which stands for AI Assisted Removal of Invasive Species for Environmental Restoration, is a 501(c)(3) nonprofit, and we're a student-run environmental advocacy organization. So basically, at the core, our mission is to use today's technology to protect today's environment, and we focus around making environmental protection more accessible. I'll just leave it at that since I'll be talking more about Project Arise in a bit, but yeah.
Great, thanks for the introduction. And then here joined today, we have a total of five panel speakers. So Sophie and I will be talking about our initiatives, and we're joined by Prisha, Joey, and Leanne. Thanks, guys, so much for taking the time. So before we get started, we just wanted to ask a few basic questions about each person. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself by name, grade, school, and your favorite hobby? So Sophie, do you want to start us off?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Sophie Zhang. I'm currently a junior at the Bishop's School in San Diego. I would say one of my favorite hobbies is either filmmaking or technical theater. I'll pass it to Joey.
Hi, Sophie. Thanks for having me. It's nice to meet you all. My name is Joey. I'm a senior at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. One of my hobbies is cooking. So thank you guys so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'll pass it on to Prisha.
Hi everyone, I'm Krisha. I'm a senior at Hamilton High School in Arizona, and one of my hobbies is baking, which is kind of like Joey's. I'll pass it to you, Leanne.
Hi, I'm Leanne. I'm currently an 11th grader at Westview High School, and I like going to cafes and getting coffee.
Thanks, Leanne. So again, I'm Alex. I'm a senior at Westview High School in San Diego. And one of my favorite hobbies is flying drones. Okay, and then going on to just a brief rundown for the meeting. So the plan is to have sort of like a career panel discussion for the first 45 minutes. So Sophie and I will take turns asking the full career panel list, different types of questions about their projects and initiatives. And then followed by that will be kind of an open Q&A where you can either leave a question in the chat or unmute yourself and ask questions to any of the five of us. And then just a reminder that this meeting is recorded. So if you are watching this later on, that's great. It will be posted on YouTube. And I'll put the link at the end of this meeting. Okay, so first question we'll be starting off with is tell us a little bit about your project.
Okay, I'll drop the question in the chat just for people to see. Okay, so my project is called Project Arise, which stands for AI Assisted Removal of Invasive Species for Environmental Restoration. And like I said before, we are a student-run 501(c)(3) environmental advocacy nonprofit. So Project Arise started as an environmental research project about wildfires and invasive species. Basically, what I found in my research is that invasive species are one of the most overlooked causes for wildfires, and they also affect agricultural productivity, public utility operations, property values, and just so many other things that people don't really pay attention to. And all of these negative effects that invasive species cause ultimately add up to over $120 billion in costs for the United States every single year. So I've always had a love for coding and computer science. So I worked with my co-founder Grace to build an AI algorithm that identifies the most invasive species in San Diego. We've consulted with local park rangers and conservation specialists, and our model reached over 90% accuracy. This summer, we led a team of other high schoolers in implementing this AI model into a mobile app, and we're currently in the process of publishing our app on app stores. So basically, the impact of our research is that this app breaks down the knowledge barrier that has historically surrounded invasive species removal. Because, in the past, in order to be able to remove invasive species, you need to memorize dozens of species profiles, memorize a proper procedure to remove them, the proper equipment, etc. And what our app does is it puts this knowledge into the hands of more people so that someone can take a picture of a plant, the app will tell them what species it is, how to remove it, how to dispose of it, etc. So essentially, the mission of Project Arise is to use today's technology to protect today's environment. And we're using our AI app to make environmental protection more accessible, enabling and empowering more people to join the battle against invasive species. Yeah, so with that, I'll pass it to Joey.
Thanks so much for sharing. My organization, Water Roots, is a cultural storytelling nonprofit. We work to showcase how different groups based on their sociological status and also their culture impact water differently. Right now we're working across 30 countries and we have 50 delegates across the world. And we're showcasing how different people, because of their geography, historical perceptions, and sociological factors, face water stress differently. So for example, we're seeing how different regions of the world face disproportionate amounts of drought or flooding, or we're seeing how specific cultural practices will influence how climate and environmental impacts are addressed. I'll pass it on to Leanne.
Hi, okay, thank you. My project is called Using Photobiomodulation on in vivo and in vitro wound models for future space travel. So I learned that wounds in space don't heal, which makes it very difficult for us to travel long distances into space. So I decided that I would use photobiomodulation and test it on 2 different wound models to try and model the wound healing process so that I can use photobiomodulation to heal wounds in a microgravity environment. So this, I'm hoping, is going to continue on in the future as well. And yeah, I'll pass it on to Prisha.
Yeah, so my organization is called Sustainability Stars. This is an organization that I started to empower like my youth, or empower my peers, the youth, to be change makers in the community, and take action on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So basically, we have like 3 main initiatives where one of them is a high school research and innovation club, where any problem that you see, we give them the mentorship and support that they need to be able to build a solution to that problem. And it's actually in partnership with the local university, Arizona State University here. And then we also do outreach workshops. So we empower middle school students through activities like Shark Tank to help like inspire them that they can be the change makers of the future. And then we also have a third initiative, which is with engaging adults and basically just getting the youth voice out there. So in key discussions such as like mayor's roundtables or different panels, getting the youth and my peers to speak up and share their voice. And like in terms of what they've done, and then hopefully we can influence some like legislation that way. Yeah. And I'll pass it on to you, Alex.
Thanks for sharing, Prisha. So my project is titled Using Artificial Intelligence and Unmanned Aerial Vehicle for Aid on Environmental Remediation. So the idea behind the project is that I live along the coastline in San Diego, and there's a lot of pollution out in the ocean or in bays. And although that's visible to our eyes, it may not be too accessible just because it's so far out from the coastline. So the idea behind the project is to use drones and like a software architecture that's capable of keeping track of these pollutants and assisting different organizations to go and retrieve those pollutants. So throughout the course of my research project, I was able to design and build a drone completely from scratch, where I was able to learn a lot of computer-aided design principles. And then the majority of my project was based around the software architecture. So my goal was to make a platform that can be passed on to other scientists or researchers that's highly robust, and it can address not only oceanic pollution, but other types of environmental remediation issues. So the software architecture was made in such a way that a model can be easily trained, like using images or a video of the environment you're trying to detect, and then passing those images into the model such that the artificial intelligence can easily detect those pollutants in whichever environment you're trying to detect. In the end, the model was able to achieve a precision of 95.7%. And the final cost was around $1,000, which compared to like Parrot's Anify AI drone, it's about 350% cheaper.
Awesome. Okay, thank you guys for the intros. We have like a variety of science research and also kind of like more nonprofit oriented projects here. So hopefully, for those of you in the audience, if you guys have questions about either type of project, you guys can ask those later. So our next question is, how did you come up with your project idea and what skills did you learn throughout the process? I'll start. So I'm a San Diegan, born and raised, and as other San Diego residents in this meeting probably know, we've got a lot of wildfires year round. So I've pretty much just been hyper aware of wildfires my whole life, and a house in the neighborhood right next to mine actually burned down recently. So after yet another devastating wildfire on the news in May 2023, I worked with my co-founder Grace in doing some more research into what exactly makes San Diego so fire prone. Since people always throw around the words hot and dry, but our ecosystems are such complex structures that we knew that we wanted to go a little deeper than that. So what we found was that invasive species are one of the most overlooked fuel sources for wildfires. Basically, what happens is that invasive species have a shorter growth cycle than native species because they have different origins from around the world. And when wildfire season rolls around, invasive species are already dry, dead, and brittle on the forest floors. So they serve as fuel for wildfires to burn faster and further. So after learning this, we went down the rabbit hole of all the issues that invasive species wreak on our environment and our urban life, including decreased agricultural productivity, global loss of biodiversity, and the 120 billion figure that I mentioned earlier that the US spends on control and eradication efforts every single year. So from there, Grace and I combined our loves for computer science and coding and our newly researched passion for the issue of invasive species. And we sought to tackle this problem by using today's technology to protect today's environment. I'll pass it to Joey again.
It's so nice to hear about your story. I've actually heard about Arise over the summer, and I never really knew how it started out. So it's nice to hear this perspective as well. Once again, to reiterate, I work in the cultural storytelling space. So my journey started a few years ago. I spent my entire childhood teaching throughout a different elementary schools in a bunch of countries, teaching English and cultural understanding for exchange. And something I noticed is that a lot of people have different aspects on what they consider to be environmental norms. So I remember there was this one time I was teaching in an elementary school in Taiwan, and I was explaining how I grew up in Minnesota, how I grew up playing hockey and all these things. And someone asked me, oh, what's that white stuff on the ground? And I realized that these people had never seen snow before. And I've seen similar trends throughout different places I've been. I experienced water insecurity for the first time. I experienced a lot of different things that people in the global south deal with a lot. So it showed me that usually on the news, we just see these statistics, but they all correlate to real lives. And instead of only portraying a lot of these through numbers or depressing visuals, it's important to share stories about the people behind these numbers. So that's where my project came from. I'll pass to Prisha. Thank you.
That was really cool, Joey. I've heard your story as well, but I loved hearing it again. It's always really inspiring to see how everyone's came together. My project actually started back when, so it's really interesting because Sophie was talking about wildfires, and mine actually started with my research project back in 8th grade. And it was basically inspired when, after family vacation, I was driving home from LA and I'd seen a wildfire. So I wanted to create a system to tackle that. And so I created my own AI-based wildfire prevention, detection, and suppression system. But as I was trying to build this system, a lot of my teachers, my or professors in the area, people who I would consider as mentors, they came back to me and said, "Oh, you're only an 8th grader. We can't really help you. I think you should wait until you're in college, and I believe that you'll be more you'll get all the support you need then, and it's a little bit early for that." And so after facing that, I realized that I didn't want any of my peers to have to face something similar, because I think that if you're inspired to make a difference, it doesn't matter what age you are, you should get that exposure and ability to be able to create any solution that you want. So that's kind of how Sustainability Stars started, where our goal is to empower and mentor the youth, and hopefully as many kids as they can, they have the resources and support that they need to build solutions to any problems they see. And I'll pass it to Leanne.
Thank you, Prisha. I came up with my project idea around 2 years ago when I went to a health conference called the Aspen Ideas Health Festival. And there was an astronaut who is speaking about her experience and her research on space medicine. And that's when I learned that wounds don't heal in space. So if an astronaut even gets like a very small cut on the International Space Station, it won't heal until they return back to Earth in a normal gravity environment, which is really crazy to me. So I decided I would start researching it. And then also from previous years, since like 6th grade, I've been doing projects based on biophotonics and using light for different biological purposes. So I decided that I would combine these two things together, and that's how I came to my project. And then next, maybe Alex.
Thanks, Ian. That was really interesting. I've also heard your project before, but it's interesting to hear it again. So the idea behind my project came out after I was hiking with my dad at a San Diego beach. So again, as a San Diego native like Sophie, I guess I've always lived along the coastline and I've seen oceans and bays, and of course the pollution that is associated with them. And although I had an like idea that there were some organizations out there that were addressing this issue by going along coastlines and collecting trash. I always wondered how trash that was further out was monitored and kept track of, or just in general, like environments where it's not as accessible to humans, such as forest fires or agricultural areas that are very large for humans to span. So that was kind of where the idea for my project came up with. I wanted to come up with a robust system that not only helped address an issue in my community, but was kind of the foundation for other scientists and researchers around the world. Okay, I think that leads us on to our next question. So, on average, how much time did you spend developing your project or initiative? How did you balance this with other commitments such as schoolwork or extracurriculars?
All right, I can start. So, well, for me, I would say it depends, honestly. Like over the summer of 2023, when Arise was founded, I spent at least, like 100 plus hours founding Project Arise and working on our AI model. Also, while I was in China for a couple of weeks for vacation over the summer. So, as school started in August and September, it became more of a matter of how much time I had each week, with other school assignments, tests, essays, and whatnot. So I spent a couple hundred hours last year cumulatively working on the AI and app aspect of Arise, along with holding service events and club meetings for the nonprofit aspect of Arise. So I really do think it comes down to how high your project or initiative is on your list of priorities. For me, schoolwork came first, but Project Arise is an initiative that, I co-birthed with my co-founder and that I've put my time and dedication towards. And it's important to me that my work with Arise actually makes a tangible impact. So I think all in all, if you know clearly in your mind where your project falls in your list of priorities, then you'll be able to manage your time in a way that is both comfortable and effective. Joey, what are your thoughts on this question?
I think there's so much emphasis in young people nowadays that you have to have your own thing. And the idea of like how much time you spend developing your project is really important because instead of like how many hours I put in per week, I think people need to consider that these passion projects take a lot of time, like in general to develop. Like my project took a year to reach the scope that it is now because it takes a lot to get like fiscal sponsors, to get financial support, to get donors, to get volunteers. All these small steps take a lot of time. And I think when you put in a lot of effort at first, you might expect a lot of results, but a lot of those things come a lot later. I think it's a little different story for me because I'm in college, so I have more control over my time. But there's definitely a lot of time management involved with balancing everything else. Yeah, I'll pass it to Prisha.
Yeah, so I think for me, I actually like echo a lot what Joey said. It's very different and there's no like set path as to how many hours you should spend to develop yours. Like my inspiration had started like back in like eighth and ninth grade, and then my freshman year I'd founded like so my initiative or my nonprofit has like three main parts to it, and so I founded that first part back in my freshman year, and then the second two parts kind of came slowly as I realized that there was more that we could do. So it started with just like the high school club where we were creating these solutions, and then we realized, wait, we can expand and we can mentor younger students as well. And so that's how my initiative expanded. And I guess the hours, they just really depend on the week, what's going on. Like there were definitely some times where I was really busy because we were organizing some big event, we were prepping for a presentation, and then there were other weeks where we were all a little bit relaxed. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much time I can say, but definitely it was a good portion of the last like, few years of my life because it's really important to me. And I guess how did I balance it? I think it's not even a matter of balance. I think it just has to do with what are you passionate about. For me personally, like this was my passion project, so I spent most of my time on this, and then my other extracurriculars were just like put to the side, or I started like leaving them because I realized that this is what I truly wanted to do. So yeah, I'd say maybe instead of balancing as many extracurriculars, I'd say focus on one or two things that you're passionate about and then give your best there. And I'll pass it on to Alex.
Thanks, Prisha. So yeah, I completely agree with your last point, especially that it's not really about how much stuff you're able to do, but rather than just focusing on one or two that you're really passionate about and dedicating as much time as you can. So for my project, it also kind of depends. But I did as much as possible during the summer, which was last summer. I started around June and worked for several weeks straight, primarily on this project. So I guess per day, maybe around 6 hours. And then of course that was a lot less time, or it was a lot less time than I actually needed because I kind of fell behind once school started. So once school started, my schedule varied and I had to kind of figure out where it falls in my priorities list. This project fell at the top of my priority list after school. So I'd always try and finish my schoolwork first and then come and work on this project. And then of course the weekends I would have dedicated for this project. Um, yeah. And in terms of balancing it with the other commitments and extracurriculars, um, I would say, kind of just reiterating what other people said, is that it's important to find where on your priority list it falls, because of course, when you're in high school, there's going to be a lot of things that you're exposed to. There's a lot of your friends that are doing different things, and you kind of want to figure out where you fall, and how much you want to put value in your own project or a specific initiative, before you focus on other things. So finding that balance earlier on is very important, and it will make you more productive in the long run. To Liam.
Yeah, I agree with all the points you guys all said. I think for science fair especially, it's important to start early because I started, I think, too late, so I wasn't able to manage my time well. So in the end, it was pretty difficult. So I ended up kind of limiting all the other stuff I did, and I spent maybe 4 hours a day on my project for the last like 3 months. And I did mess up a few times, so that also increased the amount of time. And then when it got closer to deadlines, it kind of like increased exponentially. So I think that was kind of a bad idea. So for balancing it out, I kind of had to stay in school after school to, for example, go to the review sessions so I wouldn't have to do my homework, which saved some time. And then I just reduced the amount of work I had to do through using my school time as much as possible. So I think listening in class makes a really big difference instead of sleeping. But I think just active listening and active taking notes in class really helped me cut down the time I needed to study and read at home.
Yeah, thank you guys for the insight. I totally agree with everything that everyone said. Leon, that's really relatable. I think that it really is about quality, not quantity, and picking something that you're actually passionate about will definitely help with finding that balance. So our fourth question is, what do you think was the most difficult aspect and how did you address it? And what was the most rewarding part? So from a technical perspective with Project Arise, at one point we hit a hurdle in trying to increase our accuracy rate for our AI model. We were trying to implement data augmentation, basically to increase the size of our data set so that we would have more data for the model to train on. But my MacBook did not have enough computing power for more than a couple thousand images. So, eventually we worked this out by using our school computer lab PCs, and my computer science teacher also gave us a couple tips that helped push us along. Shout out Dr. J. So I think the lesson here was to, think more about how you can use the resources around you. And from an organizational perspective, we also struggled to gain traction at first. I had reached out to park rangers, local conservation organization, and it was kind of hard to get responses from people at first. And we were thinking like, well, yeah, why would these working professionals stop to talk to a random high schooler? That was definitely a moment of discouragement, but as we just kept sending more emails, as we kept trying, reaching out to more people, eventually we got more and more responses. So it turns out when your passion and your drive to actually make a difference in the community shows through, then other people are also willing to help you out. So, after all, everyone is a beneficiary in a project that helps protect the environment. As for the most rewarding part of this, I think that as cheesy as it sounds, that I've become more connected to my community. I also know a lot more people now than I did before starting Project Arise, from other student environmental change makers like Alex, Ian, Joey, and Prisha, to local park rangers and volunteers. So I think trying to solve a problem, whether through research or a community service initiative, really helps you understand your community at a deeper level. And I think that's been one of the most rewarding aspects of Project Arise for me. I'll change it up and I'll pass it to Prisha.
Yeah, so I think for me, one of the most difficult parts was getting my project off the ground for my nonprofit. It started actually where we were having a brainstorming session for what are the different projects that all my peers wanted to solve. And so we had a great list of like problems, but we couldn't think of any solutions or solutions that were actually like viable or feasible. So we ended up doing something that was, I think, really like fun and interesting, and it was called Bad Idea Brainstorming, where basically you think of all the like really bad ways to solve the problem. And then from those, like you start asking, okay, why is this a bad way? And then from that, you can develop a better way to solve the problem. And so we got a lot of unique and very creative ideas from that. And it turned from being one of the most difficult aspects to being one of the most fun parts. Our brainstorming was only supposed to be 2 weeks, but we ended up doing it for like 6 weeks because we just had so much fun with like all the solutions that we designed. So I think one of the most rewarding parts is obviously when the Bad Idea Brainstorm succeeded. That was a really like proud moment for all of us. But I think that the rewarding part is like actually seeing the impact on someone else's face when like they realize that, wait, I can be a change maker. I can actually solve a problem. Like I did it. There were like this group of students who one of their projects they pitched to the Luminosity Lab, which is basically like a business competition. And they actually won and like became finalists. And just like seeing the like happiness on their face made me very happy that like they actually realized that they could do it. And it's not just it's not like it's really hard to do it. Like it's possible for everyone. So yeah. I think I will pass it to Joey.
That was really deep, and it's nice to hear that someone that you helped was successful. Something I think is really difficult about social impact work is the time it takes in terms of like a lot of the things you see are all volunteer work. So it's hard to motivate people to do all these things. And also, it does take time. Like you can't expect everyone to put your organization as a priority. It's hard enough that they're already engaging and being active. Um, how did I address it? I think that this isn't really something you have to address. I think it's more just an understanding and being very transparent with your team that this isn't a priority, but it is important and it's meaningful work to do as a volunteer. especially since most of the people on my team are across different time zones. So it's definitely a lot of coordination. The most rewarding part of my work, I think it's getting to interact with so many different people and get to see so many different communities. I think it's always nice to form that like human connection. I'll pass to Alex.
Thanks, Joey. That was really interesting. So for me, I'd say on the technical side, the most difficult aspect was pretty similar to what Sophie said actually about trying to optimize the model's precision. So, of course, when you're in the like constant world of artificial intelligence and machine learning, people are always trying to push these precision rates and trying to achieve better and better accuracies. So for my project, that was trying to break my set goal of achieving an average precision of more than 75%. And I'd say how I addressed that was primarily just through reading research papers and figuring out how other people did it and seeing what I could do better than them. So a lot of research papers I was reading was about data augmentation, which is also what Sophie mentioned. So that essentially just increases your data set size without requiring as much data from the user. So essentially it will like take your image and apply different filters and features to it to make the model more robust. Um, and that typically increases precision because the model is more adapted to different scenarios. And working with a drone and the environment, obviously the weather's not always going to be the same. There's going to be a lot of variances in the types of oceanic or other types of environments you're trying to detect. So it's important to adapt to those. So data augmentation was the way to go for me. I initially started with a model that required close to 5,000 images, and that also meant I had to label 5,000 images to tell the computer where the objects it's trying to detect are located. So that was obviously very inefficient and tedious. And going back to my main goal of wanting to make this a research project, not just for myself, but for other people, and having it as a foundation for them, I realized that it's important to find a better alternative and address the issue right then and there. So the next version of the model with data augmentation cut the model size from 5,000 images down to 449 images. And the precision actually increased because it had a more robust implementation. Um, so it's drifting a little bit away from the technical aspect. I'd say another difficult part of the project is just time management because when you come up with a goal or project initially, there's obviously going to be a lot of ideas flying around in your head. And in my case, I got very ambitious with my goals. And that's not to say that I didn't achieve them, but there's definitely some things that I had to prioritize over others to figure out where is the goal of my project and what makes it unique. So I mean, like one specific aspect of my project that I thought was a nice to have was being able to take the data that's being streamed to the person's computer and having that automatically uploaded to a database. I thought that was just a nice to have because the data is already being saved to the user's computer and they can manually update that data later. Unfortunately, I did not have time to implement that aspect, but all the other aspects about wanting to make a robust model with greater than 75% precision and being able to share this software architecture with others was achieved. The most rewarding part for my project was flying my drone and using the software architecture I built over a bay in San Diego and watching it just detect the different objects. Leanne?
Thank you, Alex. I think for me, the hardest part was finding a good procedure and then also coming up with ideas for the project because I had so many different directions and goals that I wanted to pursue. But then there's also a lot of limitations. Like, can I buy this type of worm, for example? Or do I have labs to do this kind of procedure? Where do I get these cells? Do I have the funding for that? And that made it really difficult. And another part was that the kind of procedure that I wanted to do didn't really exist anywhere. So I had to be able to make my own procedure. And of course, with that, I have to confirm that it doesn't have any inaccuracies with a bunch of professors. And I also have to iron out any problems it might have. So I went through it a few times and then I had to revise as I kept going. So that did take a while. And then the most rewarding part was being able to present my project to the judges because you can get feedback and you can learn a lot from them as well. And it's like bouncing back ideas. And I also really loved meeting friends from other countries through science fairs. So I was able to make friends from Guam, Japan, Australia, Korea, and like all over the US, which is super exciting because they're all super passionate about their projects. So you get to learn about different areas of science and also about different cultures and just about like how they learn and stuff, which is really cool.
Thanks, Leanne. That's really interesting. So our second to last question is, if you could change one thing about how you approached your project, what would it be? Or do you have any plans to continue your project in the future? So I'll pass it on to Sophie.
Thanks, Alex. So I think in hindsight, looking back at my work with co-founding Project Arise, there are definitely some things that I could have done differently, but I do think that all of the choices that I made and everything that I did has led to where I am right now. I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned during this process was that science research can be unpredictable. I'm sure Leanne could agree with this. Like, you don't always know where it's going. You don't know if your idea will necessarily work. You know if your plan is going to go the way you want it to, and it can be frustrating to be set back. When things don't go the way you thought they would. But I think what I learned is that it just is a part of science research, and that's what makes it meaningful in a unique way, aside from like other things. So, and that's kind of the process of how you come up with something that's actually novel and impactful. So I think if I were to approach it differently, I would have kept this in mind more, that, your plan will probably have to take a couple twists and turns before you make it to any sort of actual destination. And it's definitely easier to value the journey instead of the results after the fact, but I think it was definitely a valuable lesson for me to learn. As for the future of Project Arise, there is a lot that we want to do. So we're currently working on publishing our app on app stores. Spoiler alert, Apple bureaucratic processes can be very time consuming, but after our app is out, we'll be implementing this tool into the field. So if you want to be notified when our app is out, you can join the Arise email list via our website, which I can drop the link to in the chat in a second. And, as an organization, we're always looking to create something new. Something I researched over the summer was the use of satellite imagery in remotely sensing invasive species. I think the biggest hurdle in this idea was the obtainable resolution of satellite imagery, since satellites are obviously so far away from the Earth, and it's kind of hard to identify plants with imagery that is such low resolution. So I also looked into some remote sensing research regarding drones, but I haven't had the time to actually pursue that as a project since school kind of hit me in the face. So I think right now my first priority with Arise is definitely getting our app out, but I guess the remote sensing stuff is a sneak peek of what might come next. With that, I'll pass it to Joey.
So exciting to hear about your progress. Congrats, Sophie. Um, in terms of things I would change, I think there's not too much. I think there are a lot of hurdles and road bumps, but it was all necessary to become the organization that we have today with Water Roots. Plans for the future. Next week, I'm going down to Tanzania to shoot a film on ecotourism and the importance of protection in the Serengeti in Tanzania. So that's exciting. We're moving into the documentary space. We also have one scheduled for India in the summer. So it's exciting. And yeah, it's just a really nice time to be in the environmental space. I'll pass to Prisha.
I think for me, I don't think I'd really go back and change anything because I think anything that I faced, whether it was an obstacle or it was a success, they were all part of the journey. And I guess to speak towards my future, we want to continue our work, hopefully, and like we have the next generation of like people like younger students coming up and taking over some of the leadership roles. So I'm just excited to see where it goes and how many more kids we can mentor and how many more solutions we can create. I think I'll pass it to Leanne.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if I were to go back in time, I really wouldn't change anything. But if I were to change something for the future way I approach things, it would be to manage my time better and start a lot earlier. Because I think like sleep is really important. So I think starting earlier would have let me iron out my issues with more time available in the end to start on my paper and my poster. So that would have been really helpful. And I definitely do have plans to continue my project in the future. I'm currently looking into the use of photobiomodulation for mitigating a lot of the effects of space on the human body, not just wound healing. So for example, bone demineralization and muscle degeneration, which would be super cool. So that's what I'm working on right now. And yeah, I hope that someday I can get this technology into space. And next, maybe Alex.
Thanks again. I think I made a lot of mistakes throughout my project, but that's kind of what made my project my project. So the key things I learned was probably just prioritization of time, in terms of where I dedicated the most time. So I think it's important to keep in mind what your project is trying to address or what you think is the key innovation of your project. So for me, that was ultimately the software architecture, that's adaptable to many different types of environment and that would support other researchers and scientists. I think I dedicated a lot of time during the summer on like the design of the drone and kind of getting it up and running, which took more time than I expected. So to be honest, if I were to redo this project, I'd probably start with developing the software architecture, and then once I'm happy with that, shifting over to the development of the like the drone and building it. In terms of plans for the future, I would say um like one of the plans I have is to test the kind of zoom out a little bit and focus not just on oceanic pollution, but on different types of environmental remediation. Like I mentioned, the goal of the project is to address many different types of environmental remediation with a robust software architecture. So I think it would be cool for me to go and test this on like an agricultural environment or within like a forest fire environment.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I think it's interesting that, we all make mistakes during our process, but that's, kind of ultimately part of our journey and how we grow. So it's interesting to see that even if we make mistakes, they're still valuable to have. So our last question is, what resources or advice do you have for a high schooler aspiring to pursue a similar project or initiative to you? So I think as someone who started and is working on this project in high school, I think the best advice that I could give you is to not feel limited by your age, like Prisha was talking about earlier. Since I think research feels intimidating because there's that thought of like, how can I possibly come up with something that's like new and that no one has ever thought about if I'm just a high schooler? Because obviously there are scholars and professionals that have studied for more years than you, know more than you. But I think a huge chunk of making a successful research project or initiative is focusing on the purpose and the impact of your project. Like for Project Arise, I didn't necessarily create a new type of AI model, but I was able to use it in a way that solved an issue that other people haven't really addressed before, to make invasive species removal more accessible. So with that, you could like combine other methods that other people have used, but in a way that makes it unique and have a new purpose that's impactful because you've now created something novel that actually makes a difference. So when you get out of that box of, feeling limited by your age or your experience, you'll find that there's a lot more interdisciplinary and creative ways to use the resources around you to make a difference. Joey, I know you're not a high schooler, but I'll pass it to you again.
Yeah, I actually started my work in college, so I can't really speak for things I would recommend for people in general is to talk to a lot of people. I think just being in this call, hearing about all these stories has been really inspiring. Um, a lot of people feel that they can't do much because of their age, and I think that's a personal restriction. I was talking to someone and they were telling me how there's no future leaders, just young leaders. And I think that's like something you should carry with you. So like you shouldn't be afraid of making an impact because of your age. I'll pass it to Alex.
Thanks, Joey. I do think age is a very big part of this. I think another advice I'd give to other high schoolers, um, is trying to find your passion early on. Figuring that early on is very valuable because you know where you can dedicate the most time. Um, Ultimately, if you're very passionate about something, you're going to dedicate the most time to it, and time is not really a factor anymore. You just love to do it, so you do it so much such that you're able to achieve your goal. For me, that was engineering and drones, and I think that just because I love that so much, time didn't really become an issue. It was more of just get the schoolwork out of the way and then focus and dedicate all my time on this. Um, yeah. So again, just to reiterate, if you have something that you're very passionate about, pursuing that from the start, is kind of key because you're able to put so much effort and dedication into it. I'm going to pass it on to Prisha.
I think for this question, rather than sharing resources, I'm just going to share like what my motto is. And my motto is to be curious, dream give. I can't even talk today. Sorry. Be curious, dream big, and never give up. Don't just hope it happens. You should strive to make it happen. And I think that it kind of speaks for itself. So I'm not going to say more. Leanne, do you have any last comment?
Yeah, thank you. That was really inspiring, by the way. I think for me, I think it's while it's really important to have like big dreams, I also think for high school research especially, don't set too high standards for yourself, or else you may get burnt out or you may get tired of the process. I think it's really important to actually enjoy the process and learn from what you're doing. So I think at least in high school, it's great to explore different fields and figure out what you're passionate about, and don't feel too pressured about like having some big groundbreaking discovery, because that's difficult in high school. It's possible, but it's really difficult. So I think just learning from the process and enjoying the process is really important.
Thanks, guys, for all of the feedback. That was very inspiring, and I hope other people find it just as inspiring as I did. Okay, so we're going to be shifting into the last part of the meeting, which is an open Q&A session. So if you have any questions for anyone specific or just a general question, you can either leave it in the chat or unmute now and feel free to speak your mind. So Shell has a question for Prisha. Sounds like your project involves quite a bit of connection with the local university resources. How did you make those connections?
Yeah, so for me, it actually started by cold emailing. And so I emailed, they weren't exactly professors, they were people at ASU, and I just asked them if I could meet with them in person because I had a proposal that I'd like to pitch to them. And so I came with like a packet and a folder full of papers, and it was like my entire club, or like my entire organization, what was the outline, and what support I would need from them. And I think at least in my case, the director was just so impressed that someone at like the high school level, especially a freshman, was so like eager to do something and come prepared with a plan that he was really willing to help. And so that's kind of how the relationship started. So I'd come to the university and I just meet with them. I'd speak with the lab. And then from there, I think once I started helping them, it became like they were willing to help me as well. So it became both ways. But I guess like to be able to do that, like, of course, you can't just like cold email anyone, but I would say connections, like you'll be surprised, but I think in like your network, there'll be so many people you know who will know of people. And I would definitely ask them to connect you with that person because then they're obviously more willing to respond and help. I hope that answers your question.
So another question in the chat is, I think all of your stories are very inspiring. I wonder how have you or are you measuring the impact of your project?
I can go first, I guess. So, I think measuring the impact of a project is definitely super huge when it comes to like a nonprofit initiative or like a community service initiative. So with Project Arise, since we focus on making environmental protection more accessible and streamlining the process of invasive species removal, one of our biggest impact metrics is the number of volunteer service hours that our volunteers accumulate, which translates into like an approximate pounds of invasive species removed. So, we log attendance for all of our volunteer events, and then basically this accumulates into a certain amount of volunteer service hours, which, goes to show the commitment of our volunteer force, of our app developers, of everyone that's working with Project Arise. So today we have over like 600 volunteer hours, I think, between last summer and this summer. And we talked with a couple park rangers for like a standardized metric of how many pounds of invasive species per hour is like an approximate estimate that someone can remove. And so that's how we've translated our impact into like numbers or statistics to use. And another one of our goals is definitely going to be app downloads. So right now we're currently in the process of publishing our app on app stores. But after that happens, one of our impact metrics will definitely be app downloads, app uses, reviews, things like that. So I think if you're looking to start like an initiative or an environmental nonprofit, things like that, you should definitely think about how you're going to be measuring your impact, not only to grow your organization, but also to motivate your volunteers and motivate other people to take an actual stake in your project.
Thanks, Sophie. That was really interesting to learn how you guys measure that impact. And again, I agree with you about measuring impact is probably one of the most difficult things initially because there are probably so many unique aspects about your initiative or your project that you want to highlight. For me, I'd say that just went back to what my main goals for my project were. So my main goal was to have highly robust model and able to share that with other people. So I measure that primarily through the companies I connected and shared this invention with. One of them being NASA, which was a really cool opportunity because I not only proposed a new idea to them, but also received feedback and was able to implement some of their feedback for the electrical aspect of my drone. Another key aspect for me was cost reduction. So I wanted to make my project very accessible to others. So of course that required having low costs, so financial barriers are reduced. So I compared that to commercial solutions and kind of compared the technical specifications and how much the cost reduced through my development.
Sorry, go ahead. You're in a meeting.
Oh, okay, yeah, thank you. So for my own project, it's kind of difficult to measure impact because it's kind of in the beginning stages. So I haven't really gotten anywhere where it can impact people. But I can talk about Clearwater Innovations, which is our environmental nonprofit. So Clearwater Innovations, we've been going on for many years now, but we have blog posts and we can look at viewership in the blog posts. So I think we have a few thousand a month. And then from there, we also talk at different conferences and give presentations. So just this summer, we were at a conference in San Francisco about semiconductors, and we were able to talk about the environmental impact of semiconductors there, which was super cool. And I know those are posted online as well. And other than that, we also have an art competition so we can impact children as well. So they can learn about the environment while drawing and having fun. And this is partnered with the San Diego Pediatricians for Clean Air. So those are just a few things that we do. And yeah.
I think for me to measure my impact, it's basically ours is a little bit more straightforward, but the amount of kids that come to our club and how many solutions we're actually able to develop. And then we kind of get approximate numbers as well for how many kids attend our workshops. But I think impact measuring can be like measured in any way. And so sometimes it can just be the amount of like lives you touch. Sometimes it could just be something as simple as like how many smiles you saw in the workshop that day. So there's no really like set way to do it. But I also just wanted to say that this is the last question that I'll be able to answer because I have to drop off now. But I'm so glad that I got to be on this panel with all these amazing individuals who are changing the world. And yeah, thank you so much, Sophie, for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here, Prisha. It was really nice hearing about your project again. Okay, we'll see you.
Okay, so the next question we have is a couple of you mentioned you have assembled a team to keep building on the impact. How did you build your own team? Any valuable lessons learned in that process?
I can take this one. So I have a really big team, and I think I built it through a lot of different organizations that I've been a part of, and different networking leadership opportunities. You meet people who have similar visions, and you try to form collaborations to help build your own projects. Some valuable lessons I've seen is that you can't expect too much for volunteer work. Everything is like motivated by personal intentions. So just keeping that in mind is really important as you're building your own team. In terms of numbers, I think there's a big emphasis on like building teams really quickly. And I think it's more important to have people who care a lot rather than a lot of people who just sit around. Here's my advice.
Well, I guess while we wait to see if anyone else has any last questions, I can also answer the question about building a team. So, with Project Arise as a nonprofit, like Joey, I've also, built up a team with like app development, with volunteer service hours. And, I totally agree with what he said. Like, it's about building a team. It doesn't have to be big, but with people who actually care about this project, care about the impact that they're making, care about what they're doing. Because, I think if people are there for reasons other than that, then they won't be as invested in the project, which is okay, but that's just something to keep in mind. To find like-minded people who actually care about what you're doing, and they'll be the ones to help drive the project and make everybody feel motivated to make an impact.
Throw in my 2 cents as well. Although I didn't have a team for this research project, I do have some experience on building a team. So that for me is robotics. So throughout the past few years, I've been able to build a team that went to the World Championships, and we won first place among several thousands of teams. And I think one of the most important aspects is being able to find other people who are just as dedicated as you are. Because ultimately, if they're dedicated, then they're willing to put time into being successful. And no matter what challenges you face, you're able to figure it out and just keep working towards that goal. Okay, if there's no final questions, then I'm going to begin the wrapping up process. So, again, this recording will be posted on YouTube. So it will be posted on the We Impact YouTube channel, which is in the chat. I also linked the Clearwater Innovation website along with Clearwater Innovation's Discord if you're interested in joining. We'd love to have more people part of our nonprofit and spread awareness about our environment. And then on to you, Sophie.
Yeah, piggybacking off of that, I'll send the link for the Project Arise website and our Instagram. We send updates to our email list for our newest service events, our newest club meetings, things that are going on, especially when our app is going to be published. So you can sign up for our email list via our website. And we also post about all of our service events and everything that's going on our Instagram as well. So you can go to those channels if you guys want to stay updated. So yeah, thanks again, everyone, for being here. I hope you guys learned about, some of our projects. I definitely learned a lot about our speakers' projects. So yeah, thank you guys, speakers, for being here. Thanks for taking the time to answer these questions. Alex, do you have anything to add?
I think that should be it. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a good night.